Look at a satellite image of Oregon at night. The western edge blazes with light. Portland, Salem, Eugene, with nearly 70% of the state's population packed into a single 150-mile corridor. The Willamette Valley glows like a seam of fire running north to south. Then the lights stop. East of the Cascades, the image goes dark. 65% of Oregon's land holds just 9% of its people. Counties larger than some eastern states contain fewer residents than a single Portland neighborhood. But here is what most people miss. This is not just a population map, it is a map of an active political divorce. 13 eastern Oregon counties have voted to leave the state entirely, not to become independent, but to join Idaho. And one side is winning. This is the story of how one state became three different worlds, and why the mountains between them might as well be an international border. If you find these kinds of geographic stories fascinating, how the land itself decides the fate of the people on it, make sure you are subscribed. The wall that controls everything. The Cascade Range runs 260 miles north to south through Oregon like a spine. But calling it a mountain range undersells what it actually does. This is a wall, a barrier that does more than divide the landscape. It controls climate. Here is how it works. Almost all of Oregon's weather comes from one place, the Pacific Ocean. Massive wet storms form over the water and travel east carrying trillions of gallons of moisture. They hit the coast and start moving inland, and then they slam into that 260-mile wall of rock. The clouds cannot go through the mountains. They are forced to climb. As they rise thousands of feet into cold air, they get squeezed like a giant sponge. All that moisture has to come out somewhere, so it dumps on the western slopes. Portland gets 40 inches of rain every year. The Willamette Valley stays green and temperate, perfect for wine country and agriculture. But what happens to those clouds after they have been wrung dry? They pass over the peaks and slide down the eastern side, completely empty. The land in their shadow gets almost nothing. Cross the mountains to Bend, and annual rainfall drops to 12 inches. Keep going to Burns in the high desert, and you are down to 8 inches. That is drier than many parts of Nevada. Same state, same latitude, completely different world. The Willamette Valley is temperate rainforest. Eastern Oregon is sagebrush, ranches, and emptiness that looks more like the Great Basin than the Pacific Northwest. But the mountains do something even more fundamental than divide rainfall. They divide watersheds. The rivers of eastern Oregon do not flow to the Pacific. They flow into the Snake River system into Idaho. The water itself does not recognize Oregon as a coherent unit. Geography drew two different states. Politicians just happened to put one name on the map. The armed rebellion nobody remembers. Here is where Oregon's story diverges from every other divided state in America. They actually tried to leave. In November 1941, armed men carrying rifles stopped traffic on Highway 99, the main road between California and Oregon. They were not robbing anyone. They were distributing proclamations declaring independence. And they were not fringe activists operating out of someone's basement. The mayor of Port Orford helped organize the operation. A 78-year-old judge was appointed governor of the new territory. They called their breakaway state Jefferson, and their flag featured a gold pan with two X's called the Double Cross, representing how they had been betrayed by both Salem and Sacramento. Their grievance was simple. Rural communities got nothing. No roads, no infrastructure investment, no political representation that mattered. The state capitals took their taxes and gave nothing back. The region produced timber and minerals that built urban wealth, but the roads to haul those resources were barely passable. The Jefferson Proclamation was scheduled for November 27, 1941. The plan was to secede every Thursday until their demands were met. Then, something happened that buried the movement forever. 10 days later, on December 7th, Pearl Harbor was attacked. The nation mobilized for war overnight. Suddenly, regional separatism seemed unpatriotic, almost treasonous. The judge-governor died of a heart attack within weeks. The movement collapsed before it truly began. But here is the irony that makes the whole thing feel like a tragedy. World War II's resource demands would have solved their original problem anyway. Timber and mining boomed during wartime. Federal dollars poured into rural infrastructure to support the war effort. The crisis that created Jefferson was about to end. They just did not know it yet. History moved on. Textbooks forgot the rebellion ever happened, but the grievance never died. It just went underground. The trigger that changed everything. The state of Jefferson became a regional identity, a flag you still see flying in southern Oregon, a radio station name, a bumper sticker, a symbol of rural resentment, but it stayed dormant for decades. Then, in 1990, something happened that made everything worse. The federal government listed the northern spotted owl as an endangered species. For environmentalists, it was a major victory. Decades of advocacy had finally resulted in legal protection for old-growth forests that had been falling to chainsaws since the 1800s. The owl became a symbol of conservation. Bumper stickers appeared in Portland celebrating the decision. But for eastern and southern Oregon, it was economic annihilation. And those bumper stickers felt like mockery. The timber industry was not just important to these communities, it was everything. It was the mill that employed half the town. It was the logging company that sponsored Little League. It was the reason anyone lived there at all. When logging restrictions hit, 25,000 jobs disappeared across the region by 1995. Timber sales collapsed 45% relative to other commodities. Lumber prices actually doubled overnight, but the mills could not cut the trees anymore. The work was illegal now. Here's the part that does not fit the stereotype. People did not relocate. Economic theory says workers should follow jobs, that devastated communities should empty out as people seek opportunity elsewhere. But that is not what happened. People stayed. They stayed in economically devastated communities because these were their homes, their families, their identities. 3 generations had lived and worked in these places. You do not just leave that behind because a government agency decided an owl matters more than you do. They blamed Portland. They blamed environmentalists who had never set foot in a working forest. They blamed a state government that seemed to care more about protecting an owl than about human survival. The 1990s did not just hurt Eastern Oregon economically, it created a villain, and villains create movements. The divorce you can measure. You can actually quantify how badly things fractured. In 1966, Multnomah County, which is Portland, was 59% Democratic. Eastern Oregon was 56% Democratic, a 3-point gap, basically statistical noise. They were the same political culture, just with different scenery. By 2019, Multnomah County had climbed to 71% Democratic. Eastern Oregon had dropped to 41%. That is a 30 percentage point swing in one lifetime. That is not a political difference. That is a political divorce. These are not 2 wings of the same electorate anymore. They are different political species sharing a state boundary neither chose. The shift did not happen overnight. It accumulated election by election, issue by issue. Each time Portland voted for environmental regulations, Eastern Oregon saw another nail in the coffin of the timber economy. Each time rural counties voted for expanded gun rights, Portland saw a threat to public safety. The feedback loop became self-reinforcing. Resentment bred polarization, and polarization bred more resentment. Every major policy debate now falls along that line. Gun rights, environmental regulation, land use, homelessness, COVID restrictions, Portland votes one way, Eastern Oregon votes the opposite. And because Portland holds the population, Portland always wins. Other states have rural-urban divides. Oregon has something different, an organized political movement with county-level ballot victories, and it is not doing what you would expect. In 2015, a chimney sweep named Grant Darrow published a letter with a provocative idea. What if Idaho's border stretched all the way to the Pacific Ocean? What if Eastern Oregon just left? A man named Mike McCarter turned that idea into a professional political operation called Move Oregon's Border for a Greater Idaho. He organized volunteers, drafted ballot measures, and started putting the question directly to voters, county by county, election by election. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. State legislatures can ignore protests, they can dismiss petitions, but they can't easily ignore ballot measure after ballot measure passing in county after county. Each vote created another headline, another data point, another crack in the narrative that Oregon was a unified state with shared interests. And unlike the 1941 Jefferson movement, this one is not seeking independence. It is seeking adoption. That is the counterintuitive twist that makes Greater Idaho different from every other secessionist movement in American history. These people do not want to be their own state. They want to join an existing one. Idaho's laws, Idaho's taxes, Idaho's gun rights, Idaho's political culture. They are not rejecting American governance. They are rejecting Oregon governance. They are saying we would rather be ruled by Boise than by Portland. As of May 2024, 13 Oregon counties have voted yes on Greater Idaho ballot measures. Baker, Crook, Grant, Harney, Jefferson, Klamath, Lake, Malheur, Morrow, Sherman, Union, Wallowa, and Wheeler. One county, Wallowa, passed by just 7 votes. Out of nearly 3,500 cast, the margin was 1,752 to 1,745. 7 people decided that county's future. This is the second most successful county ballot measure campaign in Oregon history. 65% of Oregon's land area has now voted to leave the state, and Salem barely acknowledges it exists. The third. Oregon nobody mentions. Here's a complication that neither side talks about. Oregon isn't 2 regions, it's 3. Central Oregon, anchored by Bend, is transforming faster than anywhere else in the state. Bend's population grew more than 7% since 2020 alone, a pace that would double the city in less than 2 decades if sustained. Tech workers priced out of the Bay Area are moving here. Remote employees who can work anywhere are choosing mountain views over urban apartments. Outdoor enthusiasts, retirees, and entrepreneurs are building something entirely new. The economy pivoted from timber to tourism to technology in a single generation. Where sawmills once hummed, craft breweries and software startups now operate. Ski resorts and mountain biking trails draw visitors year-round. The transformation happened so fast that longtime residents barely recognize their own community, and the people moving there do not fit either stereotype. They are not Portland progressives organizing protests and voting for carbon taxes, but they are not Eastern Oregon conservatives either, the ones flying Jefferson flags and attending Greater Idaho rallies. They are a third political species, economically libertarian, culturally moderate, connected to the outdoor recreation economy rather than agriculture or urban services. They care about trailhead access and fiber optic internet, not timber policy or homeless encampments. Bend is growing faster than Portland now. It sits right on the Cascade Divide, belonging fully to neither world. If Oregon's future is decided by political gravity, this third region might be the swing vote, or it might drift toward Boise and the broader Mountain West tech culture emerging around it. The proposed Greater Idaho boundary would swallow Central Oregon too. But Bend did not vote on it. The region's largest population center is sitting out the debate entirely, watching both sides with something between amusement and concern. The binary narrative, Portland versus the ranchers, is already obsolete. There's a third player at the table now, and nobody is sure which way they will lean. The wall that can't be crossed. Here's the problem with all of it. Changing state borders requires approval from both state legislatures, Congress, and affected voters. This has happened exactly once since the Civil War, when West Virginia split from Virginia, and that required a civil war, a constitutional crisis, and a Confederate government that the Union did not recognize. In normal times, the barriers are nearly insurmountable. Oregon would have to agree to give up territory and tax revenue. Idaho would have to agree to absorb new counties with struggling economies and aging infrastructure. Congress would have to approve the deal, knowing that it creates precedent for every other state with a regional grievance. And the voters in affected areas would need to ratify everything at the ballot box. In 2023, Idaho's legislature passed a non-binding resolution to discuss border changes. It was symbolic, a gesture of solidarity with the movement, a signal that at least someone was listening. Oregon's legislature has not even acknowledged the county votes exist. 13 counties have spoken, and Salem's response has been silence. Congress has shown zero appetite for state partition in any form. Even if every single county in Eastern Oregon voted yes, even if the margins were overwhelming, the federal government could simply say no, and they almost certainly would. Redrawing state lines creates precedent, and precedent creates chaos. Washington wants no part of it. The movement is constitutionally dead on arrival. But that might not matter. Governor Tina Kotek acknowledged it herself in 2023. She said, "There are a lot of Oregonians who are frustrated and don't feel heard." That, I think, is what the movement is about. The Greater Idaho campaign has already succeeded at something the votes cannot measure, forcing the state to recognize that regional inequality exists, that rural Oregon is not just a source of timber and tourism revenue, but a place where people live and vote and want representation that matters. The question is, what happens next? If the legal path stays blocked while the grievance keeps growing, what happens to a movement that cannot win through normal politics? Does it fade away, another regional quirk for historians to footnote? Or does it find other ways to make itself heard? Nobody knows. The story has no ending yet, only escalation. Geography always wins. Oregon was drawn by 19th century treaties and congressional surveyors who never considered whether a mountain range might make a better boundary than a line on a map. They drew straight edges where the land curved. They ignored watersheds. They combined two ecosystems, two economies, two climates into a single administrative unit and called it a state. The Cascade Wall hoards the rain. The rivers flow to different oceans. The economies depend on different resources. The political cultures barely recognize each other as neighbors anymore, a 30-point gap and growing wider with every election. Meanwhile, Bend watches from the ridgeline, growing fast enough to reshape the conversation entirely, belonging to neither side, waiting to see which way gravity pulls. 3 regions, 1 state, a 260-mile wall between them. Whether the border ever moves is almost beside the point. The people on either side have already decided they do not belong together. Geography made that choice for them long before any of them were born. The Cascades do not care about politics. The rain shadow does not negotiate. The rivers will keep flowing to Idaho whether Salem acknowledges it or not. The question now is whether Oregon can hold together or whether the land will eventually finish what it started. Oregon is just one chapter in the story of how geography divides us. I have linked 2 other stories on the screen that explore how the landscape continues to shape American life in ways we rarely notice. Subscribe to stay caught up with the channel, and I will see you in the next one.